Hey, as UFC legendary ringside announcer Bruce Buffer would say, it's time for a UFC 274 preview on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in today's special guest, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. We can see all my content, uploaded videos of all different sports. Got another video hopefully coming up tomorrow, and I'll be a guest on a podcast, so I'll be the one answering questions instead of asking the questions. Also, check out the Big D podcast on Spotify and Apple. So with UFC 274 taking place this Saturday night in Glendale, I wanted to find a UFC MMA expert, and I got one. So joining us from Michigan today is Billy Ward. Billy writes for Fantasy Labs and the Action Network. Billy, did I forget anything?
Well, real quick, I was also, before doing any of this, I was a professional MMA fighter myself, which is how I got into the analytics side of it. So get a little bit of it coming from both angles.
What was your weight class?
I fought primarily 170. I went a little bit of down and up at different points, but as a pro, almost all 170.
What would have been your style as a fighter?
Mostly submissions. I thought when I started out, I was going to be some striker and knock everyone out. And then I found out real quick that I just didn't have those gifts. And all my professional wins were by submission, as well as most of my amateur wins.
Hey, that would work pretty well this Saturday night because because in the main event of the evening, we've arguably got the UFC's best submission on all this in the lightweight championship fight between Mr. Oliveira against Justin Gaethje. This is a fight I've been wanting to see because everyone has wondered who's going to replace Khabib at 155 pounds. Well, this Saturday night, we're going to find out who's the top lightweight in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited for this one. I think it's an interesting stylistic fight because Gaethje definitely has the wrestling and he probably has the power. So how Oliveira is going to approach that, I don't know if he's going to be able to get Gaethje to the ground, and I don't know if he wants to stand with him either. But, Oliveira is probably the more technical striker, and as you pointed out, definitely the better submission artist. So we've got a cool clash of styles for this one.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how both guys are entering this fight, I mean, I can't think of a better fight stylistically because you've got a submission artist, and that's a great wrestler, and a really good striker. So when I think of the fighters first, I think we should go talk with the champ because, I mean, how good is Charles Oliveira? This guy's just coming in red hot. Won the belt a year ago when he knocked out Michael Chandler, and then he choked out. And I'm not kidding. He choked out Dustin Poirier.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy who can do it all, which is refreshing to see versus some of these one-trick ponies. And I think the big question is just when he's fighting guys like Gaethje and some of the other top wrestlers, is he going to be able to get them down and turn it into a submission contest? Because all the submission skills in the world don't matter if you can't take your opponent down. So that's what I'll be watching for. That's my big, what's going to swing the fight moment.
Yeah, because if it's a standing fight, I don't remember many submissions when you're on your feet.
I think we saw one. Didn't we see one recently with that standing arm triangle from it was a female fight. I can't remember who it was. It was Lemos Andrade, the main event a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah, I think yeah, I think it was the main event, not at the last UFC pay-per-view, but one of the fight nights.
Yeah, Lemos got a standing arm triangle, which I was watching the whole time saying that's not going to work, and then she tapped. So. But, that's obviously few and far between. And for the most part, you got to get it to the ground if you want it to be a submission battle.
Well, then how about Justin Gaethje? Because, I mean, some people wondering why is he getting another shot at the title because he lost to, guess who? Khabib. But everybody's lost against Khabib. But find me a more interesting guy than Gaethje. Because this guy, Because guess what? He beat Michael Chandler. So it seems like we're all whipping on Michael Chandler, at least last year. And then tell me what Justin Gaethje can do in this fight.
Yeah, well, and not only did he beat Chandler, he beat Ferguson too. So two of the other guys that are fighting on the undercard of this one, he's got knockout wins over both of them. But the way I see the cleanest path for Gaethje to winning this one is just using his power. You know, Chandler was able to survive the whole time, but if you look through his record, it was 4 or 5 straight knockouts before that. And Oliveira is probably going to win minutes against him. You know, the longer it's standing, Oliveira is going to touch him more times. But when Gaethje hits you, man, you stay hit, to quote Rampage Jackson. So he's going to need to land that big shot. He's going to need to find it in there somewhere and just use his cardio and use his volume and aggression to keep pushing the pace until he can find that shot he needs.
If you're Gaethje's strategy, would this be a fight you want standing? Because obviously, yeah, Gaethje's a great wrestler, but you don't want to make this a submission battle. You want to make this a fighting, boxing cardio battle.
Yeah, you know, I think I would go in there with the game plan of keeping it standing, but you got to be flexible. If you're getting touched up and you're not really able to land on him, or his reach and height are becoming too much of a problem to overcome, then you might just have to roll the dice and try to take him down and hope you can survive down there. Because if you're on top, you're winning the round for the most part. So if he can win some minutes that way, win some rounds that way, you might have to try it. But I don't think that should be plan A for Justin.
Yeah, because Gaethje's not really a takedown guy. He's more a fighter. Oliveira, if it's a takedown, if it's a ground fight, it's got all kinds of submissions and a 4-inch reach advantage. So even though both guys will be at 155, that 4-inch reach advantage could be big in limiting what Gaethje can do on his feet.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, Gaethje was a wrestler. I believe he was a collegiate wrestler. But I've got my spreadsheet up right now. He attempts 1 takedown every 20 rounds in his UFC career. So he really doesn't use it. He uses it to keep himself standing so he can swing big punches, not worried about getting taken down. But it's probably there in his back pocket if he needs it. And it'd be interesting to see if he goes that route on Saturday.
Yeah, it'd be weird if the takedown artist is defending and not the other way around, is defending on his back and not attacking on his back.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. If there's a knock on Oliveira, it probably is the takedowns. He doesn't have, you know, great wrestling ability or great throws or some of these things that the other top grapplers do. So that, you know, that makes it kind of a game of chicken here to see if there's going to be any grappling or not, because Oliveira wants there to be, but if he initiates, it's probably not going to go well for him. And Gaethje might want to keep it standing, but if he starts getting hit, he might have to then take it to the ground.
It's just a contrast of fighters when you've got two fighters everybody wants to see. It just sets up for a classic. And Oliveira is a let me see, about minus 165 favorite. Gaethje plus 140. I mean, chances are, if you ask me, I don't think this fight's going 25 minutes. I think if Oliveira has got his way, it's probably a submission. But if Gaethje's winning, it will be ugly. And I don't mean ugly for his fans, but it might be ugly for the champ.
Yeah, and this is, you know, the betting line on that feels about right. I don't think I'm willing to take a side on that either way. But I will say, betting Gaethje inside the distance once those props come out, I don't really see him winning over 25 minutes. If you told me it's going to be a decision, my money would be on Oliveira. So you can probably it'll probably be north of plus 200 odds on Gaethje to win inside the distance if that comes out. So that's where I'm looking if I want to get some action on this one. Or alternatively, Oliveira by decision, because I think he's got the better minute winning upside.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a fight we want to see, because I can't wait to see what's happened, because I think Oliveira's won 15 straight fights.
Sounds right. Something ridiculous.
15 straight fights. He's going in like that. This guy doesn't lose, and then Gaethje's one of the most exciting MMA fighters in the world. So I can't wait to see this fight. I think it's one of the fights of 2022, and something tells me if this fight lives up to the billing, we may very well see this fight once or twice more.
And not to swing everything to my favorite subject, but very good fight for DFS too, because these guys both have a ton of activity. They've both got finishing upside. So I'm pretty sure, if you're playing tournaments on DFS, you're going to have the winner of this one. And for cash games, this is definitely one where I'm just plugging both guys in. I'm going to take that. I'm not taking the risk on picking a winner, because we saw it last week in the main event where both Font and Vera put up huge scores. I think we could see another one like that on DraftKings.
Absolutely. With 2 championship fights, we know what 4 of the cash game fighters will be. It's just, especially when they're both similarly priced, because Oliveira's 85, but Gaethje's 77. So it's not like one guy is 9,600 and the other guy's $7,000. Both guys are reasonably priced where you can still build a decent roster around them.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting decision point. So it's, I think me and you might be the only people that consistently play MMA cash games on DraftKings. But if we're not, a lot of people have figured out that when there's only one 5-round fight, you just play both fighters, forget about it. Like, it just makes a lot of sense for a ton of reasons we don't need to get into. But when there's multiple 5-round fights, I'm not sure that the optimal is going to be play all 4. I'm kind of leaning towards right now trying to get 3 of the 4 in, just because I think Thug Rose is enough of a favorite over Carla Esparza that I'm willing to take the chance and, bet against an upset there. And that way I leave myself upside to get a few more wins in the lineup. Because if you play those 4, you can only get 4 winners in your lineup at that point. You've guaranteed yourself 2 losers. So what are you thinking with that build? Are you locked into all 4? I don't think that's wrong, but
I'm leaning to potentially playing 4, but I mean, depending on how some of these dogs or favorites are looking, I may change it to 3 because Rose seems like a bigger favorite, but we'll see what happens. It is only Tuesday, and things can change between now and Saturday night. I mean, one fight. If I see somebody looking woefully out of shape on Friday, then maybe I'll go the other way, but we'll see.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I was initially not that big on betting Cheeto Vera last weekend, but then I saw how Font looked at weigh-ins, and I tweeted out, I was like, if you got time, get some money down on Vera, because it was not a good look for Font. So anyone, if you're doing DFS too, watch those weigh-ins, try to get the video that you can, see who misses weight. Understand that not all weight cut misses are made equal. Like some guys just kind of don't try and they say, fine, I'll just be a little bit bigger. But Font looked dead. He looked like he was really pushing to make weight. So we could see that with any of the fighters on this one, especially the champs with not getting that 1 pound allowance. That could be a big turning point.
So there's not just one championship fight this weekend. There are 2 championship fights, and this is one that we saw way, and I mean way, in the past, because do you remember when Rose Namajunas and Paul Esparza fought each other on The Ultimate Fighter, I think back in 2014?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, which is crazy that they're doing it again and that it's for a title again. A lot of time you see these rematches way down the line and both fighters have fallen off a little bit, but these are 2 women still at the top of their game, or in Rose's case, now at the top of her game, because I don't think she was quite the fighter in 2014 she is now. So it's interesting to see. This one's real interesting to me because there's some historical trends that are working in opposite directions here. Usually in rematches, the younger fighter has the advantage. There's just more room for them to grow. But also usually the fighter that wins the first bout also wins. So those 2 are working opposite each other. So I'm not too confident in this, but I think the line on Thug Rose of -200 is about right.
Yeah, I think Rose is actually -220, so she's a little bit of a bigger favorite than Oliveira. But to me, I think this fight is 2 fighters going in different directions, because I feel like Rose is ascending, and while I feel like Cole is speaking, and even though rematches can change, I feel like Rose is more mature and a better fighter than she was 8 years ago, and I'm not sure Cole is quite where she was.
Yeah, she's been really good as of late, but I think I'm with you. Carla is 34 years old, so she was 26 when they last met. She was a lot closer to her prime than Namajunas was. So to see her at 34 now, that's not old by any stretch, but is it a time in her life when we're expecting fighters to still be improving? Not really. Whereas Rose she's still not 30, which is crazy to me because it feels like we've been watching her for the past 15 years. But yeah, still only 29, definitely on the way up. His look tremendous now in 3 straight fights over Andrade and then the 2 against Zhang. So I think you're right on that.
So when you think of, Rose, she's going into this fight, even though it's at 115. I feel like Rose is the bigger fighter because she's 4 inches tall with a couple inch reach advantage. 5'5" seems like that's big for the strawweight division.
It is, but that's when, we mentioned watching the weigh-ins. That's when you start to worry about fighters that are that tall for the division, especially as they get older. Are they still going to be able to make weight? Is that going to be a problem? I don't think we're quite there yet with Namajunas, but I could see her either needing to move up or just really struggling to make weight. Like most people know, once you get into your late 20s, early 30s, you start to get a little bit heavier than you were in your early 20s, even if you are an active fighter. So that is a slight concern with me, just because she does seem almost too big for the division. But as long as it looks like she's healthy on the scales and moving well, then yeah, it's definitely an advantage.
And I feel like with this fight, Rose is going to try and keep this on their feet because Rose is the better puncher, better boxer, and I feel like she doesn't want a replay of 8 years ago where she spent the whole fight on her back, because we know what Cola's ground game can do.
Well, and she doesn't want a repeat of the Andrade fight where she got knocked out with a slam either, so she definitely doesn't want it to be a wrestling match.
Yeah, so if you Rose, simple game plan, feet.
And that's where that height and reach advantage really does help. Like, I've struggled in my career trying to take down taller fighters. That was always a problem for me, just because they can hit you from way farther away than you can shoot for takedowns from. So I think Rose will not have too much of a problem doing that. And I think once it's on the ground, as long as she doesn't get knocked out on her way, she's improved a lot there. Like, she's looked a lot better in the last few fights once it does get to grappling. So I don't think she's necessarily at a disadvantage if it gets to the ground, but she would surely rather not find out.
And if you call, do you look back at what happened 8 years ago and think, I already won the first fight? Sure, we've changed. We've gotten older. We've become more mature as fighters, but you're thinking, can I get this fight on the ground and try and get Rose in a pickle? Because, I took her down in 2014. Rose has been knocked out by Andrade. Can I get that negative feeling that, oh no, here we go again fight?
Yeah, that definitely has to be her game plan, but I don't think when the rematch is this long time of it coming, and Rose was 21, like she was a baby when they had that first fight. She was new to the sport. She'd only been training 2 or 3 years. That was practically a different lifetime. So I don't think if you're Carla, you look too heavily as to how this one's going to go. You certainly want it to go that way, but you better bring some new tricks in terms of takedowns and setups and stuff like that, because Namajunas is not the same fighter she was 8 years ago, and you're not going to be able to work those same techniques as easily as you could then.
So, to me, if I'm going to bet this fight, I would probably bet more. I'd probably bet more Rose winning by knockout. But if I'm going to bet Cola, I think she's got a chance if this goes long. But I feel like Rose winning by knockout and getting a little revenge would be the interesting way. She feels like the better fighter. She feels, even though 29's, Rose feels like a more mature and different 29 than she was the first time these women fought.
Yeah, and I think you're about right with that. I probably, we're going to have to wait until the props come out a little bit later in the week to see what those lines are, and each of them by knockout and stuff like that. One of the bets I probably will be targeting, depending on the line, is for this fight to go to a decision, just because Carla is very durable. We haven't really seen her get stopped much. And Rose has solid power, but she has solid power relative to other 115-pound women. So it's not, she's not some huge heavy hitter that can knock you out with one shot. So that's one that I'm looking at. I probably need it to be about even money or better to go to a decision before I'd look there. But yeah, my biggest interest is for DFS and how we're going to play it there.
So I mean, I'm guessing Rose for cash games and the question for me is not whether you use Rose for cash games, but to use both fighters for cash. Because if you think 5 round fight, if this goes to a decision, I'm not sure stylistically this is Oliveira or Gaethje where you need both fighters, but is this potentially one that you fade Cola because she's not really the knockout artist, not really the sexiest fighter? Do you maybe fade her in catch and maybe play her in GPPs because she could maybe get a win, maybe get a 90, 100 point win, decision win with more volume than anything?
Well, and she's got a lot of takedown upside. She's only 7,300, so if she wins the fight, you pretty much have to have her for GPPs. And similarly for cash games, if the popular strategy is to play all 4 title fighters and you fade the one that wins, you're going to be in a bad spot. So it's definitely the safer plan is just to play all 4 of them and try to find 2 other wins in your lineup, hope 4 wins get you there. But I'm not sure. If you're really confident that Rose is going to win and you think Carla's doesn't have much of a chance, I'm kind of okay with fading that one too. I initially thought this week was going to be the next round of the DraftKings Fantasy MMA Championship, which I've qualified for. And the first round of it is basically a cash game. It's 30 get through and out of 70 in the field. And I was really nervous about how I was going to handle that because that was tricky. But they've pushed that back a little bit, so it's not as consequential for me. It's just another regular week here.
So when when the first round the MMA fantasy championships will be?
I don't. So the way I timed it out before, they were having about 3 or 4 people qualify per week, and then they slowed that down all of a sudden about a month ago to stretch it out. So I think there's 6 or 7 spots left, and I don't know if they're going to try to fill it this weekend or maybe next week. But then I would imagine that the next round of the championship will probably be the next pay-per-view. Would be my guess, is they'll do round 1 in June. And the top 10 qualifiers, if you make it through the next 2 rounds, get to on DraftKings dime, get flown out and get lower bowl seats to a UFC pay-per-view to watch the final 10. So that's my real goal here, is make it to that last 10, get to go to a UFC event, not have to pay for any of it. That's what I'm really hoping for. But we'll see. I don't know which one that'll be yet.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Be honest, I would have loved to see some of the UFC events in Florida because it seems like Florida's become a hotbed of MMA events, not just for what happened last year, but there've been some UFC pay-per-view events in Jacksonville. I think there was one event over on the other coast too. So it'd be fun to see a UFC event. My brother actually saw Rashad Evans knock out Chuck Liddell in Atlanta once.
Was that in? I remember the fight. I didn't know where it was. That was a long time ago.
Atlanta. And that was one punch, and the Iceman hit the canvas and was done. He was ice cold.
I remember where I was. I was watching it at Hooters with my friends. I don't think any of us were 21 yet. And one of my buddies just jumped up and started screaming, "Chuck Liddell is dead. Chuck Liddell is dead." Because we thought he might not ever wake up from that one. It was brutal.
And that's when Rashad Evans may have been the best pound for pound puncher in the world. He knocked out other guys. He knocked out Chuck Liddell, and that still gets me to this day.
Well, and what's interesting, to bring it back to this week's card, Rashad was kind of the prototype of that guy with really, really good wrestling who just used it to allow himself to throw bombs. Because when you're not worried about getting taken down, you can load up on all your punches, you can step in, you can put weight in a way that guys who don't want to get taken down have to be a little more cautious of. So the way that we're seeing guys like Gaethje and even Chandler too, to a similar degree, these are guys who have really strong wrestling and just use it totally defensively so they can throw bombs while they have someone else on the back foot worried about getting taken down. And that was all Rashad. Like, he really kind of innovated that. And Liddell to a degree too, but mostly Rashad, I'd say, with the high level wrestling pedigree.
So outside the 2 championship fights, what fight are you most excited to see this weekend in Glendale?
Yeah, I think, Chandler versus Ferguson. I don't really see this as a fight where one of these guys gets a title fight or are legitimate title contenders, at least not without going on a bit of a run. But man, what a fun fight that's going to be, because those guys just ton of action, both swing for the fences, both really durable as well. And which also makes it a tremendous DFS fight. Like, I think every lineup you build should have one of those two guys in it, with, you know, most of them being Chandler is the prohibitive favorite, but somebody's going to put up a ton of points in that one. Ferguson doesn't need to put up that many points at his 6,600 salary, the cheapest on the slate. So that'll be a really interesting one from a DFS standpoint, and just from a pure entertainment value, because there's going to be a lot of action. Both guys attempt strikes at above the UFC level. Both guys have really solid knockdown rates, so we're going to have some fun with that one.
It's funny because just think this time last year, this could have been the championship bout at UFC 274. It just looks at how time has gone by both of them, and you wonder.
Well, and Gaethje answered that question for us, right? He beat both of them, so.
Thank you, Mr. Gaethje. But I think Chandler also fought both of them too, because. Oh, wait, yeah, you're right. I think.
Yeah, Gaethje has beat both of them within the last like year and a half or so. So, you know, that made it pretty clear that he deserves the next title fight, with Oliveira already beating Poirier. So, but down the card a little bit, you know, I'm nostalgically excited for Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon. Cerrone was one of my favorite fighters coming up and when I was first getting into MMA. But a little bit farther down, I really like the prelim fight of Chaos Williams versus Randy Brown. That's another one that seems like somebody's getting knocked out pretty violently. You know, Chaos is a Michigan guy. I've actually fought a bunch of people from the camp that he trains out of here in Lansing. Rashad Evans' former camp, no less, to tie everything together. But yeah, I'm excited for the Michigan guy. I'm excited to see another violent Chaos knockout. I think he's a great DFS play as well, because Chaos is coming in fairly reasonably salaried here. No, maybe not quite what we'd hope. 8,300, but if you get a knockout out of a guy at 8,300, that's big time, especially when we want to play Chandler and we want to play some of the more expensive fighters.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the Cerrone Joe Lauzon fight, because I mean it's a lot different than the fight afterward, but I feel like it's going to be a very different fight, because you've got two old fighters. I mean, you've got Inside, and then you've got these guys, and I feel like both of these guys need a win in the Wolves 12 sort of way, because Cerrone hasn't won his last 6 fights, been finished 4 times, not looking like the same cowboy we know, and of course Joe Lauzon's not known as a power puncher. So I think it's a fight that is very intriguing. The question is, which old guy will turn the desert into dessert on Saturday night?
Yeah, he's an underdog, but I think I'm giving the advantage to Lauzon here, just because we've seen Cerrone take some brutal knockouts. He's pushing 40 years old. He's taken a ton of damage throughout his career. He's never been a guy who fights cautiously or defensively. And just once that goes, it's really hard to get that back. And he just doesn't know any other way. He's kind of like the Diaz brothers in that regard, where you're not going to teach him to move his head and play cautiously and fight defensively. He's going to come out there. There's going to be a lot of action, but he just doesn't have the chin to support that style anymore. And I don't care who you are. You know, these are big, strong, grown men hitting each other. Lauzon can find the power if Cerrone is really that vulnerable. And we've seen Lauzon, you know, it's been 2.5 years since he fought, but he did win his last fight by knockout. He's got a couple wins in recent-ish memory where Cerrone has just been all downhill. And I really hope for his sake this is his last fight, win or lose. But yeah, I'm thinking Lauzon takes this one.
I'm saying if Donald Cerrone wins this fight, it's probably knockout. But if Lauzon wins, I think it's another decision fight. I don't see Lauzon knocking out Cerrone unless Cerrone just basically done.
And it's not so much Lauzon knocking out Cerrone as Cerrone's chin just entirely failing him. You know, like it's
maybe Cerrone knocking out himself on all his other fights, because let me tell you how many fights. Let me see. Cerrone will be in his 1, 2, 3. 53rd MMA bout, Luzon 45. So these are a couple old OGs stepping in the octagon.
Yeah, we were talking on the Action Network betting pod a few weeks back about, are we looking at years or mileage on these fighters? As a younger fighter but who's had more fights, is he going to have more durability issues? But with these guys, they're both chronologically old and they've both been fighting forever. But I think Lozon, to his credit, has taken less bad knockouts and been in less wars relative to Cerrone. So I think he holds up just a little bit better. He was always a more grapple heavy fighter. He had more decision losses in there. So like that might have him holding up just a little bit better. But it's also his first fight in 2.5 years, which isn't a good sign for a guy in his late 30s either. So I don't know. It's not one, honestly, from a DFS standpoint, I'm probably staying away from it. Lozon could definitely make me regret that if he does get the knockout, I'm thinking, but I don't know. I don't have a high degree of confidence in either direction on this one.
Could that be a fight you avoid? Be honest, I don't think I'm going to pay any attention to that in cash games. Maybe if you're in a GPP, if you're in 150, you're playing that $150, $25 entry, you might have a few of each guy, because to me, this fight feels like one you don't want to have much of anything, because Lord knows what could happen.
Yeah, definitely not one for cash. And honestly, even for GPPs, I'm not going to Cerrone here. Like, we haven't seen him win a fight in a long time. We haven't seen him stop anybody in a long time. Even if he does win, it's probably a somewhat disappointing decision. And he's 8,800. So if he doesn't have one of the biggest scores on the slate, he's hurting your lineup even with a win. Lozon at 74, kind of any win will get you there in terms of him doing enough to pay off his salary. So it's Lozon or bust for me in that one for tournaments. And like you said, not cash at all.
It feels weird that Donald Cerrone is a minus 175 favorite and he's 8,800, and Rose in a 5-round title fight as a minus 220 favorite, $100 more expensive. Somebody explain that to me. A bigger favorite is only $100 in a 5-round fight. It's only $100 more expensive.
And that's, you're hitting at something really interesting here that I think people forget about, is when DraftKings releases their salary, 99.9% of the time, they don't move. Betting lines do, though. So if you come back on Friday or Saturday and you're listening to this podcast, you say, wait a minute, that's not what the line is now. You're right. That line moved. So one thing you can do is, if you see a fighter who opens at minus 150, if they're minus 200 when you're building a lineup, they're going to be a really good value on DraftKings relative to their betting odds at the time, or vice versa. So that's a really good thing, especially for cash games, to keep in mind that if you can get some of these cheaper fighters where the line has gone their way, you might have some questions like Dylan just said, where you're like, how are you only $100 more? Well, it's because smart monies came in and told us that this guy is undervalued. This guy, or girl, I should say, in the current example.
Who is the one guy you would play in cash and in all of your cash and all of your GPP entries this weekend?
Ooh, honestly, I haven't gotten too deep into actually building any of the lineups, but if there was going to be anyone that I was locked into, outside of the 5-round fights, because that feels like a cheating answer, I would say Chaos Williams, just because he's not too expensive. He's got a decent betting line right now. I'm going to check to see if that moves in his way. But he's got enough upside for tournaments as well, where most of his wins are knockout. That's the way he's going to win most of the time. He also throws a ton of volume, which helps add up points even if he doesn't win. And his opponent doesn't really have the kind of power that he does. And that's Randy Brown, for people who don't have the fight in front of him. So if Chaos loses, he probably still scores some points, but he's also got huge upside in terms of a quick knockout and a ton of power. So that's probably my favorite all-around fighter. But with 15 fights on the card, if I'm building multiple lineups, I don't think I'm going to have one guy that's in all of them, even the title fighters for that matter.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Hopefully we don't have guys WDing, because seemingly for the last few cards, if you played UFC not this past weekend, but the one
2 weeks ago,
the one a week and a half ago, where the guy at 9,600 didn't fight and the guy at 9,500 was disqualified. You know what we're doing.
Yeah, that was terrible. And I was all about Dean Barry against Mike Jackson. And he gets DQ'd in the first fight. I'm like, I can just turn this off. This was the first card in a long, long time I didn't watch straight through to the end. I'm like, I just can't do it. This is terrible.
And
I had
be,
to take a break for tilt in that moment.
and be honest, I'm thinking I'm dead. I'm thinking I'm dead. And then one of my other guys was knocked out. I'm like, there's no way I'm catching.
Yeah, I immediately closed the DraftKings tab, shut my computer, and I was like, no, not tonight.
And then I looked up and I'm like, what? I'm catching?
Did you end up making it that week?
Yeah, I ended up
Okay.
catching.
Did you have Barry in your lineups or just
Yes.
Romanov? You managed to make it with Barry. That's impressive.
Yeah.
I don't know who these crazy people were that had Mike Jackson lineups that took down all the tournaments, but they were out there.
All right.
I would say another good fight to look at for cash games on the cheaper side is the Melissa Gatto versus Tracy Cortez fight, just from a volume standpoint, because Gatto is a 150 underdog, so not terrible. She's only 7,500. This one's almost certain to go to a decision. So when I'm looking at the cheaper fighters for cash games, I want someone who, even if they lose, I'm probably getting 15 minutes out of them just so they can rack up some points. I don't want, a Lozon Cerrone in cash games, because either of those guys could be so fragile they just get knocked out right away. So that's where, targeting the lighter weight classes and the female fighters is actually a pretty solid strategy.
And Cortez's last three fights have all gone to the decision. So even if you lose, a 70-80 point loss might not necessarily kill you if you get 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, if Gatto could put up 70 or 80 points in a loss, I'd be thrilled. She might end up in the tournament optimal lineup at that point. I'm just trying to find those spots where, we might lose, but even if we get 30 or 40 instead of 5, that can make a big difference. It's not just finding 4 or 5 winners in your lineup, it's finding those points. That's why it's not just betting.
Agree. So thanks for hopping on, Billy. We wish you best well, and hopefully you'll be breaking in all the chips this weekend.
Yeah, you too. I was really glad to find you on Twitter, because I think we are the only sickos who are this excited about paying MMA DFS cash, but we exist.
Agree. Yes. Playing UFC catch is exciting, but a little exhausting figuring out which guys to use and not use.